Good evening, all, and welcome. Tonight, we are going to be heading to the Department of Law Enforcement and Emergency Services to have some truly spine-tingling tales. I hope you're ready, because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I'm a sheriff's deputy in a fairly busy county. Along with this job comes the unfortunate familiarity with what an expired human body smells like. To me, it's very similar to an animal carcass, but with a much sweeter odor. Not sweet in the sense that I enjoy it. Hell no. That smell normally means a bad night for me, and another gruesome memory to add to my catalogue of things I would rather forget. With that out of the way, I'll get to what happened. Last night I was patrolling a geographically isolated area on the county, which is very large and very sparsely populated. Having completed the hour-long trek to Northwestern Country Line, I began driving through the mountains back to civilization. About 25 miles from town, or the closest semblance thereof, I hit a straight stretch of highway through a wide valley. Since the weather was nice, I had my windows rolled down. As I passed the entrance of an old logging road, that familiar smell of sweet rot suddenly hit my car. Not just a whiff. A cloud of it filled the cab, as if there were a week-old expired person sitting on the front seat next to me. It was all too familiar, but this time there was something else I couldn't place. It lingered for a few moments, then went away just as quickly as it had entered. Realizing what I had just smelled, my heart sank, and I pulled to the side of the road. I told myself it was an animal in the ditch, and that my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned my car around and drove slowly back towards the logging road. The closer I got to it, the smell became stronger, and I grew more certain that I was about to find what I expected. Holding onto a shred of hope that I was wrong, I parked my unit on the side of the highway just before the dirt road and radioed to dispatch, told them my location and that I would be out of my unit for a moment. I didn't say why to avoid an awkward disregard on a possible body on the side of the road, and I shined my flashlight in the ditch and into the encroaching briars and weeds as I walked closer to where I believed the source of the smell was coming from. Once I was a few yards away from the dirt road, I saw the opening of a concrete culvert going under the highway. At this point, the smell was nearly as strong as when I had first passed. The opening of the culvert was about 3 feet in diameter, just large enough to hide something inside. I cursed and held my breath as I leaned over and shined my light. An empty tunnel stretching the width of the highway. Somewhat relieved, I stood and looked around. I smelled as if I was standing on top of whatever was emitting the odor. I searched around the brush for a moment but found nothing. Thinking the origin might be on the opposite side of the highway, I crossed over to the other ditch and carried on searching. As I walked away from the other side of the road, the smell grew faint. I stopped at the opposite end of the culvert and peeked inside just to double check. The odor was nearly gone at this point. I stood up and checked my surroundings when I heard a crack in the brush behind me, and the smell that engulfed me was now stronger than before. Thinking for a moment that the wind must have shifted, I froze when I realized the air was still dead. Whether it was fear or something else, a shiver went down my spine. In the distance, I saw headlights coming down the highway. As the car came near, the odor seemed to move further away into the bushes towards where I had heard the crack. The car stopped and the passenger rolled down the window and asked if I was all right. I lied and told him I was, thanked him for checking and walked briskly to my car as they drove away. I got the hell out of there. Once I was able to get cell service, I called my friend who was patrolling the opposite side of the county. I explained what happened, trying to not let on that I was spooked. Once I was done, he paused for a moment, and then asked about the unusual hint of something that accompanied the smell. He asked if it was sulfur. I put two and two together, and it was sulfur that I smelled. I asked if he thought I had found a demon in the middle of nowhere, to which he responded with a concerned yes. A little background on this guy. He is the son of a missionary and has been around the world. He has smelled this before, and told me it was a very concerning experience. This spooked me even more, because his responses were very out of character for him. I know from experience that this community is very resourceful and provides helpful feedback. What the hell happened? Has anyone had anything even remotely similar ever happen to them? There's always the chance of a very scientific explanation, and I hope that there's one out there. Anything that could explain it away. I was living in this basement apartment beneath a TV repair shop. My apartment was connected by a single door to the adjacent basement, which was down the stairs from the shop itself. The door opens in towards my apartment and is secured with a chain lock. It's all dark and spooky in there and completely vacant, other than some wood scraps and the water heater. There are no windows, and the only ways in are my door and a trapdoor up to the stairs to the shop. Last week I was in my living room one night when I heard a loud bang. I looked over at the door to the other basement that was open, held in place by the chain lock. There's no lock on the handle, nor is there a deadbolt. The door had been closed and secured before, and it doesn't open without the knob being turned, so I assumed it was someone trying to break in or kick the door down. I called 911 to report that my house was being broken into. I noted to the dispatcher that I hadn't heard a sound after the door opened. A few minutes later, 3 cops arrived and I brought them downstairs and showed it to them. They tactically entered the other basement looking all badass, with all their weapons and flashlights drawn. One of them attempted to go up the stairs but was unable to open the trapdoor to the shop, and he set off the alarm in the process. They told me there was no one in there, and there was no way anyone could have been in there. The upstairs door was jammed. If someone had opened it, then they would have set off the burglar alarm, and apparently it was covered in undisturbed cobwebs. He said, "Man, I totally believe you, and I don't think you crazy, but you better call the Ghostbusters or something, because this is beyond us." After he left, I noticed that the door handle was loose, and a big chunk of wood was missing around the tongue on my apartment side of the door. Spooky as hell, if I'm honest. I've never believed in ghosts, but this freaked me out big, and I can't figure out an explanation for how a fully secured door just burst in like that. Luckily, I moved out 2 days later, but if anyone can tell me what happened, I'd certainly appreciate it. My grandpa used to be an ambulance driver back in the 70s and 80s. He used to do non-emergency runs, so mostly taking patients to hospital or home after operations. One day, he got a call to pick up someone from their house and bring them in. He got to the address, and a sprightly old lady was waiting for him and his colleague. They helped her onto the ambulance, lifted her case in, and made sure she was safe and went on their way. It was about 25 minutes to the hospital. They arrived, went around to help her, but she was gone. There was no patient and no case. It was gone. Puzzled, my granddad and his friend radioed in to say that they'd been delayed. They headed back along their route looking for the missing patient, but there was no sign of her. They get back to the house and go knock. No reply. Granddad goes to have a look in the back window, and he sees the patient lying on the floor, deceased, wearing exactly what they saw when they'd picked her up. They radio for police and paramedics, who arrive and confirm she's deceased. At least a few hours, they say. My granddad and his colleague are stumped. They know they'd put her in the ambulance. They still can't explain what happened. and my granddad is still a non-believer after having several paranormal experiences. My sister-in-law works for the local police near where I live. There's also a bridge near here, over the motorway, which has been used by people from time to time to end their lives. The bridge isn't in a residential area. It's either side of the motorway, and there's a moorland, a reservoir, and a few scattered houses. Every now and then police officers have to drive to it and park there for a while to make sure no one's there and to try to deter people from taking the plunge. A few police officers have said that they don't like the job. It makes them feel uneasy. A few tell stories of rattling car door handles like someone's trying to get in. My sister-in-law just thought they were pulling her leg until her friend got freaked out up there. It was getting dark when my sister-in-law's friend was sat there in her car. No one was around. She was checking something on her phone when she thought she saw something out the corner of her eye. A dark figure standing next to the passenger car door, but when she looked up, it vanished. Then this feeling of oppressive sickness came over her, like she could easily just be sick, and everything felt tight and closed in. She looked around but couldn't see anyone and stayed there for more than 10 minutes looking around to see if she could identify anyone. She said the entire time the sick oppressive feeling stayed. Eventually she stayed long enough and she drove away, and the minute she got off the bridge and turned the corner, it was like she was released from the oppressive feeling. She hates going there now, but nothing happened again. My sister-in-law had to do it as well, but nothing happened to her. But then again, she's always had another officer in the car with her when she's gone. The local authority are finally changing the barrier on the bridge to a 6-foot-tall fence to try to deter people from taking the plunge. I'm a 25-year-old female, but this takes place when I was 12. I grew up in a pretty safe neighborhood. This took place on a weekday, and I was very sick, with flu-like symptoms. At this point, I had stayed home alone a handful of times. My parents didn't really like leaving me home alone at 12, but they had no choice on this particular day. My mum worked early in the mornings, between 2:30 a.m. and didn't get off until 10:30. My stepdad was also working during the day. I'm going to try and explain the house as best I can. There are big windows in the front of the house, and the blinds and curtains were open. The front door was mostly unlocked. I know it sounds horrible, but we lived in a place where bad things didn't happen. There are also 2 big tall windows on each side of the front door, so that anyone at the front door can look right into the dining room and living room. I never thought anything of those windows until this happened. It was sometime in the morning. I was still in pajamas and my mum was still at work. There were no cars in the driveway. All of a sudden, someone rang the doorbell. I was upstairs at the time and I didn't get to the door right away. The person started knocking really hard on the door. I looked from upstairs to see if I could see who it was. It sounded like a police officer. Unfortunately, because those stupid windows are big, I was able to see the man and he saw me. We made eye contact, so I felt really weird about not answering the door. He knew I was home, so I decided to be brave and answer. He pulled out a badge and showed me his business card and claimed to be part of a special investigator unit and that he needed to park on our driveway and wait on one of the neighbors that he was spying on. Okay, go ahead, I say. He walked back to his car. I locked all the doors and windows and went upstairs to call my mum. She told me to hide in the closet and that she was calling the police. Luckily enough, my parents' house is right around the corner from the police club, where the police officers do target practice and stuff. Almost immediately, there were a total of 9 cop cars outside my house. I was terrified. An officer knocked on the door and scolded me for answering the door when I was home alone. They were also in the process of arresting the man in my driveway. He was armed and I later learned he was waiting on my stepdad to come home from work. Not really sure what he was going to do, but he was armed. My mum and dad refused to share any details with me, so the rest is unknown. I really can't remember anything else after that. And to the special investigator, let's never meet again. I worked nights as an officer, and while on duty, it was extremely slow. The only things out were stars. There was fresh snow on the ground and there were no street lamps or illumination of any sort. That's why I liked it. Every cop has their secluded go-to spot on patrol. Mine was an abandoned campground. Any time I needed to think or finish some paperwork, I'd just go there. I would go there frequently so I felt comfortable, but not on this night. I was sitting there and I felt as if I were being watched, very uneasy. I would check my mirrors every 30 minutes or so because of it, and if I wanted to look outside, I would press on the brake because it was dark enough that the red light would show the surroundings. Finally, I started focusing on my paperwork and not on my paranoia. 10 minutes go by. Rapidly, my car started violently shaking as if someone or something were trying to tip it over. My paperwork, food, and duty gear were all flying all over my vehicle. I couldn't see anything, so I did what anyone else would do, put the car in drive and sped out of there as fast as I could. I drove to the place with the most lights I could find. I didn't want to be in the dark, as I tried to make sense of it. But how could something be that close to the car and me not see it? We have elk, so that's what it had to be, right? When I stopped freaking out, I got out my vehicle to assess the damage. The force that moved the car had left a dent and a scratch. When I looked on both sides of the rear of the vehicle, they were covered in handprints, and I freaked out. By what I described, my buddy was equally freaked out. We both gathered up the courage to go look back for footprints in the snow, and when we got there, all you could see were tire tracks and not a single footprint. I have not gone back to that place since, and doubt I ever will. I very recently became a qualified paramedic, and have seen many creepy things while working, and one story in particular sticks out. This was back when I was a student. One night I was working on a car with my mentor. We got called to an 84-year-old patient who lived in a creepy cottage in the middle of nowhere. When we walked into the cottage, we heard her shouting upstairs. The cottage was filled with cobwebs, dirt, and was icy cold. When we went up, we saw that she was sat up on her bed with her eyes open. We obviously asked her lots of questions, why we were called, and the like. She told us that she could see children, notably children who'd passed on, climbing up the side of the cottage on ladders. She then said that she would not sit on her commode due to hundreds of spiders crawling all over it. My mentor and I were extremely creeped out at this point, but the next thing that happened will stay with me for the rest of my life. The woman started waving behind us. We both looked and there was no one there. The woman then started shouting and screaming, and when we could finally calm her down, she said there was a little girl who had something around her neck. This will forever stick with me. I'd like to just hope it was a water infection causing the confusion, but who knows? My husband is an EMT, and while I don't think he's responded to anything seemingly caused by the paranormal, he is convinced that his little station is haunted. On a regular basis, he'll be in the kitchen at night and hear the garage door open and an ambulance drive away. Only nobody's being called out. When he checks, both ambulances are still there. The strangest one he told me about was he was laying in bed one night at the station, on his side facing the wall as he scrolled through his phone. He heard shuffling outside his closed door and wondered if it was his partner coming in to get him for something. Suddenly, the shuffling was inside his room, like socks on carpet. He starts to roll over when he felt two hands grab him and shake him once, like to prank someone and scare them awake. No one was in his room. Apparently, a paramedic did pass away in his sleep at the station a few years back. My husband just assumes that whatever ghosts are there are just people continuing to go through the motions of their former job. I worked for Starbucks for about 2 years in 2 locations, from 17 to 19. The one I transferred to was the new one in town that I was training for in the next town over. They tore down an older cafe that Starbucks replaced. I happened to have a friend who worked at the cafe, and they said they only experienced minor happenings. Well, this is what happened to myself and my fellow co-worker as we were closing one night. Normal night after closing. I was doing the floors, cleaning the bathrooms, and after closing someone was still inside. I knocked to let them know that we're closed and the person said, "Okay," and I hear them wash their hands in the sink. This is a single-room bathroom with no stalls. The locks we used were the same types used in hospitals, being true locks that you cannot accidentally lock behind yourself when leaving. Also, there is a motion-censored light that turns off after 15 minutes of no movement. My shift supervisor cannot do the drawer/registers with a customer still inside the building, so after 20 minutes I knock once more and ask if they were okay. I hear a man's voice say, "Yeah," then grunt after grunt, followed by many bangs and the sink turning on and off. I live in a small town with many people who use in bathrooms. Prior to this incident, someone was banging on the wall and shooting up within it. Police were contacted and he was removed. So, with that happening before, we thought it would be the same case. We called the police, and the station happens to be right next door to our Starbucks. We're behind the station. They never came because it was very busy at night. The motion sensor light is still on after an hour, and there are more bangs in the sink being turned on and off. I knock again to let the person know the police were notified. There's more grunting, and there is a key to unlock the door. But as I was 18 at the time, I wasn't going to put my co-workers at risk. My co-workers and I keep doing the closing routine as best we can, but are on alert as this person is making a lot of noise and sounds in distress. We call the police again, and after about an hour of waiting for them, the operator says we'll have to wait it out. I'm watching the light under the door until after a while it goes off and there's no movement for 15 minutes. My shift calls my general manager, to which he says contact 911 for an unresponsive unit because the person could have passed away from an overdose within the bathroom. Next thing happens are the firefighters with the EMTs. Everyone can hear the man grunting once the EMTs ask if he was okay and that they were opening the door. The EMT opened the doors to where no one is found. He looks at us and everyone is frozen. We tried to collect ourselves, but I was shocked. There is no vent in the ceiling. The trash can is big, but not big enough to hold a person. And there was no way for us to not see the person leave when we heard him grunting seconds before the door was opened. My co-worker that worked with me that night quit shortly after, as did I. While I worked there, I had the ice bucket thrown at me, food thrown at me, items appearing across the store when they would never by law be there in the first place. Only a small handful of the original workers from there had opted to stay. My manager still works there and she's convinced that there's something weird going on there as well. I'm a police officer in a city of about 30,000 people. I am currently assigned to our midnight shift, working the hours of 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. At the beginning of my shift, I'm called to a house in what can be described as the wealthier part of town. I'm told by dispatch that the resident of the house, a teenage girl, believes that an adult male is attempting to enter the home. So I activated my lights and sirens and arrived at the home a short time later. I knock on the door and make contact with the caller, a frantic 18-year-old girl. My sergeant arrives on the scene a short time later. I ask her to describe what happened, and she explained that while laying on the couch she heard pounding on the front door. She then looked out to peep and didn't see anyone. She then heard banging on the back sliding glass door and screaming coming from outside. Again, she didn't see anyone. We ask if anyone made entry into the home. The complaint denies this, and my sergeant and I check the area, finding no footprints in the yard. We also check the dew in the grass, finding it to be undisturbed. We also checked the glass for fingerprints and were unable to locate any. We chalked it up to the girl's friends playing a prank on her or her having an overactive imagination and leaving the house. Approximately 3 hours later, we are called back to the residence. We are notified that the female believes someone to be inside the home. I beat my partner to the house by approximately 3 to 4 minutes, enter and begin speaking with the complainant, who is visibly shaken. I am told she was awoken by more banging and a man saying, "I know you're in here." The complaint states that she had barricaded the basement door with a chair, as she believed someone could easily enter the home through the attached garage. I tell her to stay put in the living room and go search the basement and garage. I drew my firearm and search the basement. During my search, I feel very uneasy, as if I am being watched. I complete my search as my partner arrives, and I walk back upstairs and meet with her to tell her that I haven't cleared the rest of the home yet. She draws her weapon and helps me search the rest of the home. The last room we enter belongs to the complainant, and it's her bedroom. Inside the bedroom, we find a Ouija board to be in plain view. We deem the resident safe and go back to the living room. At this point, she is frantically shaking and crying. We ask if she lives alone, and she states that she stays with her grandparents. She also states that they are out of town on business, and that she is frequently home alone due to them being out of town on business. I ask to call and speak with her grandpa. I chat with him and learn that the complainant does not have any mental health issues nor behavioral issues. The complainant doesn't use any form of drugs that he knows of besides nicotine, and he states that he's going to call another family member to come look after her. We speak with her again, learning that she does not currently suffer from mental health issues, and admits to smoking weed occasionally, but not partaking on any the night of the disturbance. She also advised us that she found the Ouija board that day hidden in a closet of her home. Her condition further degraded as she requested that we take her elsewhere. My partner, being a female officer, transported the complaint back to our HQ, where she was picked up by a family member sometime later. I stayed at home, searched the surrounding area again, and did not locate any signs of a person being outside the home. I don't know if this is the right place to share this, but I believe the girl may have experienced something paranormal. I for sure did not feel good while being in the basement. I used to be a huge skeptic of the paranormal until I took this job. However, I have experienced and dealt with multiple things that I could not explain in regard to calls to service. My partner also started to feel very uneasy while being in the house. Anyone think she may have stumbled across something? Or did we just feed into the paranoias of a young girl who was home alone? Unfortunately, I have not been called out to the home ever since, so I have not got to investigate the occurrence any further. But thank you all for listening to my experience, and for your time. I got dispatched to an older lady having back pain. When we got there, she was sitting in her living room and said that the people in her room wouldn't let her call 911, and they can see us now and don't like us. She said that she'd been in pain for weeks and didn't want to call now because they told her not to. Honestly, I thought she was talking about the nursing staff. The captain checked the room and no one was there. There was no one else in the apartment. We checked her vitals and brought her into the squad to take her to the ER. While in the ambulance, she kept muttering to herself. I couldn't help but think, wow, what a crazy old lady. At one point, she looks over into the seat next to her and says, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. It looks like it hurt, but I'm glad that you're at rest." She turned to me and says, "You weren't on the accident, but he says thank you." What she didn't know was the previous shift had a bad car accident they responded to where their patient passed away from their injuries. Turns out she had an undiscovered spinal cancer that had spread to her brain, thus the back pain, and she passed away a few hours after I brought her in. I still wonder every time I'm in the squad car, who's riding with me. 6 months ago, I also got called back to the same apartment for a psych problem. A guy in his 60s. The family was concerned because he claimed that he was seeing faces peeking out of the corner of the room, and that he knows he isn't crazy nor schizophrenic, but he knew he was seeing them. Maybe it's just a fluke, but I just got goosebumps remembering it now. I'm a nighttime security officer for a really wealthy and old gated community. This place has been on National Registers of Historic Places since 1974, having been established in 1888. Over the decades, 3 security officers have passed away, and one of them was crippled protecting this neighborhood. The people here have always been terrifyingly wealthy and politically connected, but the area surrounding it has steadily gotten worse and worse. We have incidents here regularly that they run from gawkers, drunks, and junkies all the time, all the way to burglars and people with the intention on taking. It's 2 parallel streets, perhaps half a mile square, and a few of the houses have burnt. 80 to 25% of them are still original. There are a few couple homeowners that are new. Many of the houses have been owned by the same families since they were built. That expanse of time will create a bond between this place and the bloodlines which inhabit it. It is also plenty of time for tragedies to occur. I've been here about 4 months, and just now I'm beginning to hear about the misfortunes and misadventures. Working the 3rd shift one night, as I sat in my cruiser on my phone, I noticed something in my peripheral. I look up at the intersection ahead, and I saw something, to the extent that it looked like anything in particular. It seemed to be a swirling cluster of grey shapes flying around each other, but the whole fracas started out of sight behind a wall which surrounded a yard of one of those houses. I threw the cruiser into gear, got to the intersection, hung a right, and headed down the street. The median of this street is a green, wide area with old growth trees, but I caught sight of it again. I moved up the driveway of a house on the other side of the street. To get there, I had to go all the way down to the end of the street and loop back on the other side of the median. It was nowhere to be seen on the driveway. I dare say, understandably, I was disinclined to investigate on foot. In fact, I cancelled the rest of my foot patrols that night. The first time I saw it, it had already occurred to me that it could have been a small group of bats or 2 owls fighting. So we have both here and a lot of wildlife. The second sighting on the driveway nullified that possibility. It was still a swarm. What was it composed of? It didn't appear to have changed or reduced. The distance it had travelled would have to have been a long way for it to go if it were some animals who were locked up. And most terrifying of all was the way in which it moved. Its movement was deliberate and strongly suggested intelligent, controlled motion. Oh, and as I'm sharing this, a streetlight just went out a few seconds ago and has now come back on before I can finish this sentence. It wasn't just a flicker. It went off and on, unhurriedly, smoothly, deliberately, like someone was adjusting a dimmer. My sight superior is very reassuring and was just like, "Oh, you've seen the ghost. A woman who ended her life for reasons which have never been ascertained." It's interesting that's all he volunteered. Just prior to this sighting, one of our dispatchers told me that my supervisor told her that he's been seeing shadow people here. I'm not sure why he doesn't care to be more open about this with me. Am I seeing shadow people? I'm afraid I might be. At this point, it's still borderline. I've been on edge of late for about 20 different reasons. I've had multiple run-ins with shadow people before, even in broad daylight, and none of them were as iffy as what I might be seeing here, and this is outside at night. Whatever it was that I saw recently was not a shadow person, and no chance of it being stress, optical illusions, or depression. I know what I saw, and I've not seen it again, thankfully. My old man was in the police. He was driving down a country road one night when he noticed a motorcycle and some guy stood at the side of the road. My dad pulled over as it was late, and a dangerous area for the guy to be stranded. My dad spoke to the guy, and it turned out his bike cut out and wouldn't restart. After some chit-chat, my dad quickly returned to the police van for some reason. When he returned to speak to the motorcyclist, there was no one there. My dad looked around, listened for the noise of a motor, footsteps, anything. But there was nothing. It seemed that in the 20 seconds he had popped into the van, the motorcyclist and his bike had vanished. My dad called out for a bit in case he and the bike had relocated elsewhere out of sight, but it quickly dawned on my father that he was on a country road and there was nowhere for the motorcyclist to disappear to that quickly with a heavy bike. My dad said he freaked the hell out, got in the van and left. He said the weirdest part was that he physically touched the guy's bike. Few days later, after mentioning it to a colleague, it turned out that a biker a few years prior lost his life at that spot in a tragic accident, and he's not the first to mention such an incident. He still hates talking about it to this day. I'm a corrections officer at a county jail in northwest Alabama. I work a 12-hour night shift from 6 to 6. Most nights are calm and not much happens at around 10 to 5 a.m. And other nights you're moving non-stop and police officers are constantly bringing people in. You have a lot of DUIs, junkies on weekends, and then anything from an FTA to the occasional person taking someone else's life throughout the regular work week. Like I said, most of my nights are calm, meaning the hours feels like days, and sometimes a single shift can make you feel like you've been there for a week. But sometimes, those calm nights are really not all that calm. We have 2 holding cells in the front of the jail, used to house inmates that we have recently booked in, and are waiting to see the nurse for a screening before going to Gem Pop. We have another room called the Pink Room, due to the walls and ceilings being painted a hot pink color because a former sheriff thought hot pink was a calming color. Everyone hates that room. It's our drunk tank, equipped with cameras for observation and a flushable drain in the floor for any liquids that might come out of someone. If you know what I mean. One night after lights were out, when everyone was asleep, I heard a loud bang in one of the holding cells, like someone was hitting or kicking the door, which would have been a normal noise if anyone would have come inside one of them. But my partner and I had moved everyone out of the 2 holding cells just a few hours ago, and no one else had come in that night. I thought it might have been the guy we were keeping in the Pink Room for medical observation, but when I looked over at the monitor for the camera in there, he was sound asleep on his mat in the floor. I went over to the doors of the holding cells to investigate, lifted the heavy curtains on the windows so that I could see into each one, but there were no signs of anything. I figured I just was hearing things, since that noise is so commonly heard all times, day and night. I went back over to my desk and sat down. It was about 2:45 when I heard that noise. It was completely silent until about 3:05, and I started hearing the noise it makes when a door is unlocked from the control room. From the control room you can unlock or open any door in the facility, except for like 3 you actually need a key for. There is a door right behind the desk I sit at that leads to the kitchen and rec yard. That was the door that sounded like it was unlocked. I radioed my partner who was in the control room and asked if she had unlocked the door. She said she hadn't touched the computer since I asked her to let me outside and vape 2 hours ago. Again, I thought it was a common noise to be heard and thought the silence was playing tricks on me. But I heard it again, except this time it sounded like the front door. I look over at the monitors for the front door and saw nothing, but on the monitor for the Pink Room I could see the screen starting to get fuzzy like static. Then it went completely black for a few seconds. When the camera came back on the inmate, he was sleeping in the same spot, but everything he had in there with him, his cup, shoes, blanket and like, was scattered across the whole room. I would have heard him moving and throwing things, but it was completely quiet for those seconds as the camera was black. After that I decided I didn't want to be alone anymore. I went up to the control room with my partner and started telling her what was going on. After I told her about the doors unlocking and locking, and about the guy's stuff in the Pink Room, she just laughed and said, "Must have been Christine." My partner had been working there for 5 years, and told me that Christine was an inmate that died in the old jail next door, and that for reasons she still haunts this jail, because the buildings are connected. She told me about numerous things that have happened while she was on shift, including actual sightings of the ghost she calls Christine. She said that Christine has grey hair down to her shoulders, wearing a night white gown, and also said that Christine can be seen walking down hallways on the cameras, inside the cells with her hands on the bars, looking through them, and sometimes you can see her face from the windows outside. I worked as an EMS at Woodstock 99. On maybe the third day or so, I was stationed at the main stage area. We had a walled medical station in the center of the crowd, and a secondary station near the side of the stage. I remembered when Limp Bizkit started playing Break Stuff. Idiots started throwing bottles and things into the medical station. Other idiots started climbing the walls. We ended up evacuating the station and reconvening by the secondary one. Never found out what happened to the injured people who were still inside. I also remember the day before, The Offspring came on stage, and moshing started. I was surprised how many people and how frequently people were coming in with head injuries. One kid had blood pouring from his head, but still wanted to get back out there. Then there was the girl who was tripping and freaking out because someone stole the rest of her narcotics that she was planning to sell to fund her trip home. She ended up biting one of the paramedics and we had to restrain her. We heard she later escaped from the hospital. There was also a kid with a shark tooth necklace that was high on mushrooms and started chasing our ambulance. Reese. Also, we didn't charge $4 for water. We were handing out Gatorade for free because everyone was suffering from dehydration. When I was a child, I used to see shadow people around my house. I never saw them anywhere else. They were always at the end of the hallway or in a doorway. I've never seen them straight on. They were always in my peripheral, moving into another room. They scared me, so I never tried to follow them. This was 10 years ago. I don't know why I stopped seeing them or why I never saw them anywhere besides my house. Recently I started seeing them again, but this time it's out in public. I'm an EMT and have been seeing them at hospitals and around my ambulance. I've seen them several times in the sides of mirrors on my ambulance and in my own car. When I was in the ambulance, I was sitting up front with my partner posting. As we were talking, I saw what looked like a person walking in front of this passenger side mirror. But when I looked, no one was there. Then I saw the same movement in the driver's side mirror. It was as if the shadow had walked around the truck. I had written off some of the weird things that happened in my childhood home as an act of imagination. But now that it's starting again after so many years, I'm really freaked out. What are they? What do they want? And why did they come back? If anyone has a way to make them go away, I'd appreciate you sharing it. This happened to me when I was 13 years old on my bike. I crossed the bridge in town and saw an electric wheelchair scooter sitting empty. Thinking it was odd, as I looked back, I see a man standing on the other side of the guardrail for a split second before he jumped. I had passed him and didn't even see him. My brain didn't even register what happened and I went about my day. After a week I was acting strange because my parents finally asked me what was wrong. I told them, spoke to a school counselor, and ended up putting in a police report. I was told by the police that even if I had reacted, they figured that the guy perished on impact. With the water, there was nothing I could have done. I still have regrets about not doing anything, but I honestly don't think my brain could comprehend what was going on at the time. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. Sorry they're late. Had a bit of an issue. You see, originally this video was just going to be police stories. However, the one that had been marked down as the longest, and that would have pushed this video to the 40-ish minute mark, had been deleted. Which is very challenging. This sometimes does happen. Stories get deleted and then I can't read them. So I had to, as I only had 11, and one of them after reading it, I decided it wasn't even that good and opted not to use it. I thought, you know what? I'm gonna have to fuse this with another relevant topic, and I just had enough emergency service stories to kind of fuse this video together into one. So I hope you liked it. I don't often do fusion videos, but there you go. I figured that there is a relative amount of overlay between the two topics, and I hope you appreciate that too. Alright then, I better wrap things up because otherwise you guys will never hear this video. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.